Good evening. My name is Barbara McPhail, and on behalf of the United Methodist Women and the United Methodist Men of Main Street Church, I welcome you. We're pleased to once again partner with the Suffolk Commonwealth's Attorney's Office to sponsor our 5th Forum on Domestic Violence. It's our goal to raise awareness and to bring the causes and effects of domestic violence out of the shadows. We've learned that domestic violence exists in all parts of society. Victims and abusers come from all walks of life, rich, poor, young, and old. For the past year, we feel that God has blessed us and opened up paths for people to learn and connect with each other, to share their stories, and to recognize when someone may be a victim or may be in a situation that could lead to domestic violence. We're glad that you're here tonight for this very special presentation. And just a little housekeeping, our restrooms are across the atrium in the office building, and we'll have light refreshments afterwards. In addition, each pew has what we use on Sundays as an attendance pad. But we'd like for you to sign in tonight, if you will, and include your contact information so that we can get you on our mailing list if you're not already there. And now it gives me great pleasure to turn the program over to our favorite Joan Turner, who is the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Suffolk Commonwealth Attorney's Office. Joan?
Good evening. The Suffolk Commonwealth Attorney's Office is so cool. We're just excited to have this partnership with the Main Street Methodist Church. And on tonight, as our 5th program, we're going to have a domestic violence awareness program. Before we begin the actual program, I wanted to introduce you to persons at the table that questions can be asked at the end of the program. And the person sitting from your right to left, my left to right, is Mr. Phil Ferguson, the Commonwealth's attorney for the city of Suffolk. Next to him is one of our assistant Commonwealth's attorneys, Meredith Travers, who actually, she takes care of all cases and prosecutes all cases in the city of Suffolk on domestic violence. Next to her, if you would raise your hand, is Brittany Landon. She's one of our assistant victim witness directors for the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, and she works hand in hand with Meredith. Next to her is Tashana Hilton, and Tashana is the program director for the Geneve Shelter. She'll talk a little bit more about that during the question and answer period. Next to her is Ms. Mary Williams. Ms. Mary Williams is a counselor, and she handles a lot of child advocacy issues and concerns. Next to them are the speakers for tonight, Mr. and Mrs. Carr, and they will share their story and some information as time permits. I'm not sure if the lead detective out of Greenville, North Carolina, if you will come forward, I believe Detective Mike Blunt, and if Ms. Ponsock is with you, Lynn Ponsock, she's the victim advocate for Greenville, North Carolina, where this incident occurred. If you would sit right here in the front pew, please, I appreciate that. And thank you all for coming from Greenville. We appreciate that. Right there on the front pew. Thank you. I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Phil Ferguson, whom everybody, if you don't know him, you will know him after tonight. Mr. Ferguson has served as Suffolk Commonwealth's attorney for over 38 years. An undergraduate of the College of William & Mary and a graduate of the Marshall Wythe School of Law at William & Mary, Phil is a lifelong Suffolk resident and has over 40 years of experience in the investigation and prosecution of criminal cases. Phil is a leader within his profession, currently serving on the boards of the Virginia State Bar and Virginia Association of Commonwealth's Attorneys. He is a member of numerous legal, civic, and business organizations, but still finds time to be very active in the community. It is my pleasure to introduce him to you so that he may speak to you about the Suffolk Constitutional Officers, Suffolk Commonwealth's Attorneys Offices, and the many services provided to the citizens of Suffolk, as well as the innovative programs he has instituted as our Commonwealth's Attorney. Mr. Ferguson, it's all yours.
Good evening. Let me say, first of all, it's a real pleasure for me to be here this evening, but what's even more of a pleasure for me is the fact that the Suffolk Commonwealth Attorney's Office has had the ability to partner with Main Street Methodist Church here in Suffolk. We've had 5 of these forums dealing with domestic violence, and I think for those who have attended any of these meetings, they have been significant in what they have offered. They've each been different, and I hope that those who have attended have certainly learned something from them. I can tell you, and I say to the church and the people from Main Street, we deeply appreciate the help and the support and the things that you have done to make this partnership a reality. And I certainly pledge on behalf of the Commonwealth Attorney's Office that we will continue to work with you, we will continue to support you, and we will continue to do everything in our power to try to curb the incidence of domestic violence, because it is a vicious and wicked thing that can happen to any family at any level under any circumstances. This is not limited to any one group of people or otherwise. It is literally nationwide. It crosses all lines of everything from socioeconomic to otherwise. And the bottom line is, it is something we all need to be aware of, and we all need to do everything in our power to try to reduce the incidence of this occurring. I would like to take just a few moments to introduce some of the elected officials that are here this evening. I would like to start with Vice Mayor Leroy Bennett is here this evening. Vice Mayor Bennett, I appreciate your attendance very much, and we appreciate your support. You've been very supportive in many of these things that we have done, and I'm very pleased to see you here this evening. I would also like to introduce there are a number of my fellow constitutional officers that are here, and I would ask if you would just stand when I introduce you. Number 1 is Ron Williams, our treasurer. Secondly is Susan Draper, our Commissioner of the Revenue. And third is Randy Carter, who is our Clerk of Circuit Court. All of these folks are elected by you, the people of Suffolk, and certainly they're very supportive of what we are trying to accomplish here, and I would like to thank each of you for appearing as well. Again, thank you. I would also like to recognize some of the members of the Commonwealth Attorney's Office's staff, and in fact I would ask, because there are a number of them here and some of you I may not be able to recognize, and I know I'm going to miss somebody if they're not standing. So if the members of the Commonwealth Attorney's Office's staff that are here would stand, then I will recognize you. If you would do that at this time. I would first of all like to recognize in the front is Karen Williams, who's the Chief Administrative Manager in my office. As I work towards the back, I have Tom Shia, who is a Deputy Commonwealth's Attorney in Suffolk. I have Elizabeth Duke, who is one of our legal assistants. Marie Walls, who is our Deputy Commonwealth's Attorney in charge of the Juvenile Division, which actually oversees the domestic violence prosecutions as well as any other cases that involve, that come through that court system. I have Diane Bryant, who is our Victim Witness Director. Matt Glassman, who is one of our Deputy Commonwealth's Attorneys in our office. Heather Emmert, who is an Assistant Commonwealth's Attorney. And Vaughn Breedlove, who is an Assistant Commonwealth's Attorney. In addition, I believe you have met Meredith Travers, who was introduced previously, who is our domestic violence prosecutor, and Brittany Landon, who is in Victim Witnesses Division, but her primary focus is on domestic violence cases. So I'd like to thank all of you all for being here this evening as well. The final thing I would like to talk to very briefly, I would like to let you know that on March 1st through the 29th, every Tuesday and Thursday evening from 6 to 7:30 in the Courts Building, the Suffolk Commonwealth Attorney's Office will be sponsoring our 5th annual Citizens Academy. Actually, it will be the 6th Citizens Academy. This program is designed to educate the public about what we in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office do throughout all facets of the entire office, from the administrative piece to the juvenile court division to domestic violence to the general district division, including violent crimes, drug-related cases. In fact, when you leave this program, if you come, you will know literally everything that we in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office do. And inasmuch as you are the citizens, you will be much better educated as a result of what you learn. In addition to that, the other 4 constitutional officers will be present. Those include the Clerk of the Circuit Court, Randy Carter, who will talk to you about what that office does. You will have Sheriff E.C. Harris, who will talk to you about what that office does. You will have the Treasurer, Ron Williams, who will talk to you about what his office does. And you'll have Susan Draper, who is the Commissioner of the Revenue. All of us will be talking about what we do, and the reason is simple. We, the constitutional officers, are directly responsible to you, the citizens of Suffolk. You elect each of us individually, you elect each of us, so you, in effect, collectively are our bosses. And so as a result of that, we feel it's important that you know what each one of us does on a daily basis so you can be better informed and better educated about exactly what it is that we do. For any of you that would like to attend, please contact Joan Turner, our Community Outreach Coordinator. We have handouts and we have applications that you can fill out, or you can go to the Suffolk Commonwealth Attorney's Office's website, which is online, and you can actually fill out an application form actually online. So again, that will be March 1st through the 29th, every Tuesday and Thursday evening from 6 until 7:30. And I will promise you, if you go through this program, you will come out far better educated than you were when you went in. At this point, I would like to introduce to you Assistant Commonwealth Attorney Meredith Travers, and after her, Victim Witness Assistant Director Brittany Landon, who will talk to you a little bit about what we're going to do this evening and about our speakers. We anticipate this to be a very powerful but also a very tragic situation that occurred as a direct result of domestic violence. Meredith?
First of all, thank you all for being here. I think Joan is encouraging me to use a microphone, and that's generally not something that I do. But if you can hear me, I'll try to project my voice a bit. Before we begin, and before I have an opportunity to introduce the Carr family and the detective that's come, as well as Ms. Ponsick, I would ask that a member of the congregation from the United Methodist Church here come and lead us in a moment of silence in honor of the victims of domestic violence.
Let us bow our heads in a moment of silence. Blessed be your name, O Lord, for you are the God who daily lifts us up. You carry us like a shepherd who cares for his lambs. You loved us even before we knew you. You redeemed us, and you have carried our sorrow and our griefs. And you sent your Holy Spirit to be our comforter and friend. Now, Lord, let your Holy Spirit fill this place. Let your name be glorified among us. Tonight, strengthen the Carr family as they tell us their story. May they be comforted and receive your grace and peace. We pray for our district attorney, Phil Ferguson, and Meredith Travers, for Brittany Landon, for our representatives from Geneve Shelter, and all those elected officials, Father, that are here among us. Lord, we pray also for our police officers, for our mayor, for all those that assist in the attorney's office, Lord. For they are the ones that daily administer your justice and righteousness, and they need your wisdom and discernment. Now, Lord, help us to listen with open hearts, that we may hear the cry of those who need help. Help us to be sensitive and to respond in love and compassion. Help us all to be your faithful disciples, Lord, and always may your name be praised and glorified forever. Amen.
Thank you all for being here. It's a tremendous honor to me and to the entire Commonwealth Attorney's Office on behalf of Mr. Ferguson. We're here because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Domestic violence is something that, as Mr. Ferguson mentioned, affects all areas of the community and all socioeconomic classes. This is something that has become a passion and a life's work for many of us that deal with and see the effects of domestic violence on a daily basis. We're here tonight to not just honor those who have survived, but also to recognize the efforts of the people who helped to get those who are in domestic violence situations out of the tragic situation that they have. We're here to honor the Carr family. And on August 16th of last year, 2016, Miss Garlette Howard and her 3 children, and Brianna Toon, and Mayana and Ayana Toon, you'll have to help me with those pronunciations, were killed. They were massacred in a domestic situation, and we're here tonight to honor their memory, for the Carr family to be able to share their experience with us, and then to try to move forward and talk about services that are available and what we can do as a community to try to end domestic violence. I would at this time like to introduce, as previously mentioned, Detective Mike Blunt, who was the lead, my understanding is the lead detective. He's here on behalf of Chief Holtzman of the Greenville, North Carolina Police, as well as Len Ponsek, who is a victim advocate with the Greenville Police Department. We appreciate your efforts in coming here tonight to support the Carr family, as well as to honor any and all of the survivors and victims of domestic violence. I think that what we intend to do is to have a panel discussion to talk not just about what occurred with the Carr family, but then to make it a productive and meaningful conversation about what we can do moving forward, so that this is an opportunity to honor those who have been affected by domestic violence. So at this time, I'm going to step down, and we will have the honor of hearing from Mr. and Mrs. Carr. Thank you. I think it's on the bottom.
Okay.
There we go.
So basically, we're here, we just wanted to get out the word about domestic violence, how it affects families, the things that we went through on last year, and we held an event this August back in Greenville to honor our daughter and her mom and 2 younger sisters. It's been a hard year trying to deal with everything and knowing what we have ahead as far as the trial and everything goes. But our message is don't hold secrets. Secrets kill. If there is anything going on, get help. Let someone know. Don't have your children thinking that you shouldn't say anything. Don't tell anyone. We had no idea. We had no idea what was going on at home. We got a knock on our door at 3:30 in the morning saying that our daughter was murdered. So we don't want anyone to go through this. What do you want to say?
Only thing I want to say, it's kind of hard. It's really hard when somebody knocks on your door at 2 o'clock in the morning and tell your child been deceased. And I don't know what can we do as a family, or support each other, or try to help people. If the law enforcement go to the house and had domestic violence, and maybe we can. I don't know what else to do. I'm just hoping, praying today that somebody can get something out of the deal, to get some help, or the children get some help. It's so hard. It's just hard. I don't have a story to tell. It's just so hard. I thank God for my wife and helped plan the funeral. Me and my wife, we planned the funeral. We did it all together by ourselves, because the other family was so hurt, and it was a lot. But at the end of the day, I thank God for y'all allowing us to come here today. It makes a lot. I'm kind of nervous a little bit, so I just want to thank you.
And we will have a question and answer period starting in just a moment, but in appreciation of the Greenville Police Department being here, I would just ask that Detective Blunt let us know, generally speaking, how the Greenville Police Department is proceeding at this point. Not to get into the specifics of the case, but if you had any words or remarks just as it relates to what your department deals with for domestic violence cases.
Good evening, everyone.
Amen.
First, I want to thank you for the invitation. We were more than pleased to make this trip, a couple-hour drive. We just got off work, jumped in the car, and headed this way. Apologize for being a little late, but again, we came to work this morning with every intention of being here. Mr. and Mrs. Carr have been godsends. Like I said, they did a function like this in Carolina, and made some people aware of some things that they didn't know before, and they have continued to do good work. So when we got the invitation and had the opportunity to come, our chief was more than happy to make sure it was possible to make all this happen. As far as where we are 1 year into this case, and as you can probably tell, there's a lot of work to be done. Everything is going as it should be at this particular time. We have no obstacles that we're facing thus far, and from this point on, the legal portion will take its course, and it was moved as fast as the legal system moves. But we're doing everything that we're supposed to do at this particular time. Everything is on the course and on schedule. Again, thank you for the invite.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Detective. We have as previously introduced, we have a panel of various people up here that have different aspects to bring to domestic violence cases. And we would welcome any questions at the end of the conversation. But what I would like to do at this time is give each individual that's here is in a professional capacity, an opportunity to speak to domestic violence and their particular role and experience with it, and what they can do and what they think is important to be communicated to you as it relates to affecting in a beneficial way and honoring the victims. Mary, do you have?
I'm a counselor with the YWCA, and we offer counseling services for any victims. The first 6 sessions are free of charge, and then afterwards we go on a sliding basis. We offer services for the children that may have witnessed the domestic violence, because oftentimes they carry the trauma or PTSD into adulthood with them. It doesn't just go away by ignoring it. It can cause a lot of damage psychologically to children. We offer victim advocacy. We accompany any clients that may want to get legal assistance. We refer them to legal aid. We also give them information on protective orders, how they can protect themselves. And we explain the differences of the 3 different types of orders to them, and we accompany them. If they need or feel like that they need a little extra support, we accompany them to the magistrate's office. And we have a 24-hour hotline. And probably more than that, but that's all that's all that comes to mind at the moment.
Thank you. Good evening. Again, my name is Tashana Hilton. I'm the program director for the Geneve Shelter. And we are the agency that provides a safe refuge and supportive services for victims in the Western Tidewater area. And I just want to start by giving a little background about our founder. Teresa Connell, was our founder, but she was also a survivor. And she witnessed the death of her mother by the hands of her stepfather in a domestic violence incident. And she recognized the tragedy that occurs in a family, such as the Carrs, such as her family, and many families that suffered the ultimate tragedy in this horrific crime. Teresa Connell saw the need for services for victims in our area, the rural communities in the Western Tidewater area. And so the first thing that she did was she worked hard and she started a 24-hour crisis hotline. And she had a 1-bedroom apartment over a veterinarian clinic. And that 24-hour hotline says that at any time you can seek help from us and we'll be there. And that 1-bedroom apartment says that we will provide a safe refuge. And that's what we hold dear to at the Geneve Shelter. 30 years later, we're celebrating 30 years of service. We have that 24-hour crisis hotline. We partner with 3 other wonderful agencies in our community, the YWCA, the Hearst Shelter. Beth is back there, the director of the Hearst Shelter, and the Samaritan House. And in that partnership, we say that if someone calls and they're in imminent danger, one of the most dangerous times for a victim is when they decide to leave or law enforcement is involved. And that's why we also have the lethality assessment protocol with the Suffolk Police Department, that when we respond to those domestic assaults, that there's a victim advocate on the phone at that time, talking to that victim and helping them understand the help that's available for them, the rights that they have legally, and helping them to make a decision. Like Mrs. Carr said, those secrets, that silence is what kills our families, it's what destroys our families, it's what makes this crime so horrific. And one of the most powerful tools an abuser could use is the isolation. So we provide those services as well as counseling and housing and employment. But I think the most important service that we provide is that crisis intervention piece. And that's the most important service you can provide in the community, is not to allow the secret to remain, to speak up about it, to say something about it as soon as you can, as often as you can. And I'm open for any questions that you may have.
Good evening. Again, my name is Brittany Landon. I'm the Assistant Victim Witness Director, and I focus on domestic violence cases. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I do. I work with Ms. Travers hand in hand. I'm able to pull the police reports that come in daily that have anything to do with domestic violence. So my main, focus is to tell the victims about the process that's going to happen once someone is arrested and kind of hold their hand and walk them through that process. For people that have never been through it, it can bring all types of emotions: guilt, shame, fear, nervousness. For many people, it's the first time they've spoke out, or maybe they spoke out before and then they got scared and went back to that person. I'm sure many of you know that most of our victims of domestic violence have tried to leave several times before they were able to leave the relationship for good, and that's for many reasons. So one of the main focuses I do is try to inform them of the process, but also to be there as a support, to give them those resources, to connect them with Janine Shelter, to connect them to the Y and to the different counseling agencies that we work with. Another thing that I do is I work a lot with protective orders. So a lot of times when we have people that are going through the criminal process, they don't really know what to do after their emergency protective order expires. An emergency protective order is only good for 72 hours. So a lot of people are so filled with so much information and nervousness that they don't know what to do, or they let that expire. So one of the first ways I meet them is setting up an appointment to help them extend that emergency protective order. So normally I'm meeting with them if they wish to do that within a few days of the incident happening. So that way they're able to meet someone. If Meredith is in court, I'll go ahead and introduce them to her so that they know her face as well, and kind of walk them through that process of what it means to extend that protective order and explain the process. As most of you know, with protective orders, it's a two-step thing. So once they get that preliminary protective order, they're going to get a court date to come back in about 2 weeks. And so I'll be there on that court date as well to help sit with them, to get them a room that they can sit in so they're not sitting in front of their abuser if the abuser's not in jail, and just kind of help them through that process. Many of them have been isolated. They don't have family or friends to be there with them in court, and oftentimes the person that is abusing them comes in with their family and their friends, and they have no one. So just having someone there that's being a support, even if they don't know me, they get to know me, and they get to know those resources. So I think the last thing that I just want to say is, whether you're working with someone that's a victim of domestic violence, or you're a friend or a family member, you have to meet them where they are. Oftentimes, we're not going to agree with the choices that they make, but we're going to have to support them regardless of whether they're going back to their abuser. Knowing that we are there for them, they will often call back again when they are ready to leave. And sometimes that's really hard when you're working with that victim to do that, and that's super important. Let them know you're there regardless, and you're going to be there when they're ready to leave. Thank you.
From a domestic violence prosecution standpoint, I think it's important for us to recognize that the intensity of these types of events and the effect that an event like tonight can have on the community. So again, and thanks to the Carr family, one of the things that we deal with on a daily basis from a prosecutorial standpoint is that victims have such a myriad of emotions, and we understand that. So once a victim gets to the point that they are involved in our process, it's a matter of what we can do as a community, but also from the Commonwealth Attorney's Office perspective, to assist them, as Brittany says, to meet the person who's in that situation where they're at. Oftentimes we as a community, and whether it's members of church group or just a friend that you see down the road, you might feel like there might be something happening in the house, particularly those who are in contact with children. There might be a concern that something is actually going on in the house and that it could be a detrimental domestic situation. And so those of us in the community that may not be in that situation, what can we do as an outreach to help the people out of that situation? When we are in court, I would say over half of our cases have victims who are not sure that they want to proceed for all of the reasons that we can understand a cycle of violence. So for the purpose of a night like tonight is to recognize the impact that domestic cases have, but also what we can do to help somebody out of that situation. And I think that the main message that we want to get across tonight is not just to support the victims and survivors of domestic violence, but also to help spread the word, because one of the biggest issues, as Ms. Carr had recognized, is that it's a secret and it's something that people don't want to talk about. So whether it's at an early stage of a prosecution or whether it's time for trial or in events like this, just getting the word out into the community that there are support services and that we are there to help protect and do whatever we can to meet the family where they are.
I think you've heard most of the issues. The bigger picture issue from my perspective is this. Domestic violence is about power and control. In most of the cases, it is the male figure who is trying to dominate and control the female figure. Not always, but in most cases that we deal with. We have found that when women come forward and will work with us, will allow us to help them both in the protective orders and getting on their feet so they're more independent in some cases, and we can help walk them through the process, we find that they do a lot better. Where we end up with problems or the victims end up being re-victimized is when they come in, and this happens more frequently than I would like. They will come in and they've called the police one night. It's pretty clear what has occurred. They may have been actually assaulted or other things, and their physical injuries on them. And they've told the police what occurred, and they've told them basically the truth. They've told them exactly what occurred. But then what will happen is sometime later, they will start to wonder whether they really want to go through with the process. And when they don't go through with the process, in some cases, they will come in and deny it occurred. They will say that it really didn't occur that way. It was really my fault. He didn't really do anything to me. When those things occur and the victim starts trying to put the blame back on themselves, then that's when the power and control has really taken over completely. And it is when, at that point, it allows the abuser to abuse again and again and again, because he has no fear that something is going to occur or he's going to be held accountable. I can assure you that if the person that is abused will work with us through the process, and I'm not saying it's easy, I'm saying if they will work with us, most of the time we can get a result that is a positive result that puts limitations on what the abuser can do, and if the abuser does continue with that type of behavior, there will be serious consequences for that individual. And so that is the biggest difficulty that we have in the prosecution of the cases. Again, when we have victims who are willing to work with us, they're willing to stand with us the whole time, we can be quite effective in what it is that we are doing. And we recognize how difficult it sometimes is. But if you don't, or the victim doesn't go through with the process properly, then the same cycle is going to repeat. And unfortunately, the people that are generally the most hurt by these things are children that may be in the household. In other words, when children see and observe what is occurring in the home, in many cases, those children will think that is normal behavior. And in some cases, children that see these things occur will actually grow up and become abusers themselves because they think that is how it's supposed to be. And so it is critical from our perspective, and we've got many different levels of people that are working to try to help the victims of domestic violence from a standpoint of victim witness services. You've got the Geneve Shelter, you've got the psychological piece attached to it, you've got the prosecution piece attached to it. There are many different ways that we can be of service to them, but we have to have the support and cooperation of those who are victimized. Without that, it becomes very, very difficult for us to do our job. And so the big question is, and the message we're trying to get out is, that it's not okay for people to become victims of domestic violence. And if they are victims, then they need to be willing to stand up, as difficult as it is, and work with us so we can try to end the abuse. Because the problem is, if we don't end the abuse quickly, then it, in many cases, gets worse and worse and can ultimately lead to a homicide case and end up, as happened in the Carr situation, where people are actually murdered. And that is what we do not want to see happen. And just because somebody is prosecuted for domestic violence does not per se mean they're automatically going to jail the first time something occurs. We can work with victims to bring resolutions that will try to bring about positive change. But we have to have the cooperation of the victims in order to accomplish what needs to be accomplished, because otherwise it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. We find abusers frequently will promise, oh, it won't happen again. I'll never lay a hand on you again. And invariably, it does. When they go back and they realize they've gotten off the first time, then they go back and they abuse again. And then the same thing happens, and they are promised from the abuser, oh, it won't happen again. Then guess what? When they walk out that time, they feel they have literally a license to abuse because nothing is going to happen to them. And so the bottom line is, if we can nip it in the bud, if we can nip it the first time, then there's a real opportunity for things to go in a positive way, for change to occur, and also it will ensure that that person who has been victimized will no longer have to suffer as a victim, and rather, in many cases, hopefully it will clear out and correct the entire situation. But if not, then the abuser needs to be separated from the victim in some way so that that victim does not have to suffer the abuse on an ongoing basis. And that's the reality of what these things are about. What we don't want under any circumstances is to see what happened in the Carr case, which is someone who has been abused, suddenly now we've got homicide cases that we're having to prosecute because people have been killed, including young children. That is totally unacceptable, and it's something that we are trying to prevent in a proactive way by taking the steps we are taking. But we have to have the cooperation of the victims in these cases for us to do the best job that we can do. And that, to me, is the critical piece that has to occur.
We wanted to give an opportunity for anybody that's here tonight to ask questions of us. I know because there is still an active case in North Carolina, there is probably limited information that the detective could give. But having said that, as it relates to anything that we can do as a community, we are available as a panel to answer any questions. In addition to that, we just wanted to thank Main Street Methodist for having us and for hosting us. We have developed and enjoyed, and I think the community has benefited from our partnership with Main Street United Methodist. Following any formal presentation, I also just we wanted to let everybody know that there will be, I think, light refreshments in the adjacent room. And there's also an opportunity to leave a message if you feel so led, a message of encouragement for the Carr family. You'll see that there is an area in the adjacent room. I would ask that the church speak to that, and then we would be available for formal questions if in fact there are any.
Yes, there's a basket on the altar in the atrium, which many of you entered through that way. And if you would like to leave a prayer or a concern or a comment for the family, just drop it in that basket. And if you're ready for questions, if anyone has a question, if you'll raise your hand, I'll bring you the microphone so that we can all hear what you're saying.
How effective are protective orders and how are they handled?
Okay.
Maybe off. Sorry.
Okay, so your question was about protective orders. So normally when there's an incident and an arrest is made, say there was an assault and battery on a family or household member, the police come out, they determine that there has been an assault and someone's arrested. Normally the police issue an emergency protective order. That's good for 72 hours. The victim can also go to the magistrate to get that. It's only good for 72 hours. That gives them time to go to the courthouse and file for an extended protective order. When they go to the courthouse, they go to court services. We have Miss Todd here, and she's in charge of protective orders. So her and I work very closely together. Whenever she has someone filing for what's called a preliminary protective order, she'll call me and let me know. And if it's not someone I've already scheduled to meet with them, I'll come up and introduce myself and help walk them through the process. So a preliminary protective order is that first step after the emergency protective order. It seems like a lot of steps, but the preliminary protective order is good for up to 15 days. And it's a sheet of paper that they fill out, information about the abuser and about the abuse, the most recent thing that happened. And there's also a place where they can bring up other things that have happened. They have to focus on what's happened most recently, though. That's what the focus is. And that day that they file the preliminary protective order, they actually go before the judge that day. So I'll stay with them, I'll go in the courtroom with them. I can't speak, but I can sit behind them and be of a support. The judge will have what they wrote in front of them, and they'll decide whether to grant the preliminary protective order. During that time, the person that it's against is then served. They have to be served in their hand with the protective order. They have to sign for it. And at that point, a date, well actually, when they go before the judge, when they're given the protective order, the date to come back is on the bottom. So generally speaking, it's about 2 weeks from when they file. So say they go to tomorrow, then they would come back around November 14th for what they call a permanent protective order hearing. The permanent protective order isn't good forever, even though it kind of sounds like it is. It can be good for up to 2 years. At that point, both people have to come back to court. So the victim, the petitioner, and the respondent, the person that it's against. And at that point, they have more of a full hearing to discuss what's gone on to make this person afraid. And the judge at that point can decide whether to grant a 2-year protective order. There's lots of different things that you can actually have the protective order say. Some people say they want no contact, no exceptions. Other people say, I have a kid with this person, I have to talk to him, but I only want it to be text message or email as it relates to the child. So that's actually something that they can have written on there. So there's different things that you can ask for, but the maximum amount of time is 2 years.
What about enforcement of the protective order? They have a piece of paper.
Yes.
But how do you prevent the perpetrator?
Yes, I'm going to let Ms. Travers speak on once it becomes a violation of a protective order, because at that point, our office can get involved as far as a criminal case for a violation. One thing I always tell victims is, it's great to have a protective order, and in a lot of cases, it does help the person to stop contact, but not always. I always tell them it's a piece of paper, so you still have to be careful. And at that point, we safety plan. That's really important regardless of whether there's a protective order or not.
I think that that's one of the key pieces is a piece of paper going to actually protect a victim. And the reality is that no, it is a document, and that if an abuser is determined to abuse, there may be a situation where the abuser goes around the protective order. But it's a step in the process. All of this, as mentioned previously, is about meeting a victim where they're at. Oftentimes we find that protective orders are good to at least give the initial separation. Whether or not a defendant, what would become a defendant or an abuser actually is going to adhere to the terms is certainly a question. And in the majority of domestic homicide situations throughout the country, there had been a protective order at some point. Having said that, there's no reason not to begin the process because, as Mr. Ferguson mentioned, oftentimes prosecution and disposal of domestic cases, and I mean that in a successfully dispositive way, begin with, it's a process. It's like building a brick wall. So with each step in the process, there's a better chance to protect the victim. Yes, sir.
What happens if they violate the protective order? Are they arrested? Are they kept
Yes, sir.
incarcerated?
So it's an excellent question, and one of the things that we find is that there are certain cases where a violation of a protective order is more likely to have a judge look at a defendant and say, you've already been ordered not to do something and you're violating it. So perhaps pending the case, if there is an active case, or pending even a civil matter between the parties. If the court has a recognition via a charge of violation of protective order that the offender is not going to adhere to it, then yes, I have found in my personal experience the courts are much more likely to hold that defendant pending the assault when we do that because of how volatile situations can be pending the next case. So in addition to a misdemeanor domestic case, which is many of the cases, in fact, the overwhelming majority of the cases that we prosecute in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office begin as misdemeanor domestic violence charges, which means it's punishable by up to 12 months. If the victim has a protective order in place, in addition to potentially charging the defendant with that domestic assault and battery, a violation of a protective order in a standard situation is an additional charge of up to 12 months. So yes, it does have with it an additional charge. There are certain factors that can elevate the level of criminal culpability for the protective order. So yes, it helps, but one of the things that we want to take away from a night like tonight is it is a piece of paper, and the best thing that we can do is to try to prevent something from ever becoming an issue where a protective order is needed.
Any other questions?
Just for the Carr family, I know that you guys can't talk about the case much, and that's fine, but as a prosecutor, and I know the prosecution is different in North Carolina than it is in Virginia. What would you have liked us to have done? Or what would you have liked to have seen us do that you have not seen yet during the case?
Personally, I think the continuance is, and we don't know a whole lot about the legal system and how things occur, but it's taking a long time. We're getting continuance, and then there's another continuance, and the next court date is in February. We don't know who will go to court or not. We have limited information, so we don't know a whole lot about the case either. So those are my two things that I wish things would speed up a little bit so we can figure out, what's going to happen, so we can kind of start to put pieces back together, because it's just like we're kind of stuck out there. We can't, we've had the funeral, but it's like, holidays are hard, and we just want to start to heal. And then we have to open all this stuff up all over again. We have to see everything and how they were murdered. And, it's going to be hard. So we don't want to keep prolonging it.
Yeah, I agree. I think communication. We had several questions asked the DA. We sent emails, nobody responded. And, you know, we up in the air. And so a lot of times me and my wife call, nobody returns a call back. So we don't know what's going on. And so that's the problem that we have. Now, Detective Blunt, I can call Detective Blunt anytime. He'll call me back. If I send him an email, he'll let me know. The DA told me when it first happened that it had a speedy trial. It should take a year. Detective Blunt, maybe I should have said this, but Detective Blunt pulled me to the side. He said, that's not going to happen. And I appreciate that, to be honest with me. Not just tell me, okay, well, we're going to have a speedy trial and this ain't going to take long. And we know that's a lie. I mean, you got to go through the court system.
I guess one of the most important things that we have, sometimes you'll see it happen the first time, you may take it through court, they may get a conviction, and they're back at it again, some reason, whatever reason they cross paths, either going back together or something. And when it happens the second time, that's even worse. The fact is that in Virginia, you can be convicted of a domestic violence misdemeanor and possess a gun. In your line of work, in the federal law, it's a federal felony. They go to federal penitentiary for that. Y'all sometimes farm out people to the feds, because I think if that's to the point, you need to get that guy out of there. You need to make sure he stays away. And he can't stay away on his own volition. He needs some help. And maybe the feds will give a little bit of help. But y'all sometimes refer out gun possession cases on domestic violence to the feds, because the state doesn't really have a remedy.
Randy, were you addressing that for our office or for North Carolina specifically?
Microphone.
Randy, were you addressing that for our office or for North Carolina in particular? Or just...
I went to law school in North Carolina 4 years ago, and I care to think about it. I've probably forgotten a lot of Carolina law, so with all due respect to North Carolina. But I'm just saying in Virginia,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I think that's important is, I remember Judge Kelson used to have a theory of sentencing that's called incapacitation, where they put somebody where he can't do it again. And I'm just saying that if you start having what I call a serial domestic violence person, I think, and I've made a lady from Geneva Shelton, lady from Hawaii, who deal with that on a professional basis, and maybe answer to that, whether there's sort of people that just do it over and over and over again. And it comes to the point where he gets caught with a gun, even if he's not abusing somebody, police officer stops a guy who's got a domestic violence conviction for a traffic stop. He's got a gun. That's a federal law. That's a violation of federal law. It's a 5-year felony. So I'm just saying, if you try, I think, and this sounds harsh, but I think sometimes you just got to get the abuser away from him.
That's right.
Well, they maybe the victim wants him right for financial reasons and things like that. But I think sometimes you need to put them somewhere where they can't do that.
Let me just say this, I can speak of Suffolk. If we have somebody that's a consistent domestic violence abuser, we will take every step necessary to separate that individual from the person that has been abused. And also, if it's a third offense domestic violence, he's been convicted twice before, the third offense becomes a felony criminal offense. And at that point, in many cases, they actually are held in jail pending the trial. So we take a fairly aggressive approach in dealing with defendants if we feel that that person is a continuing threat to the victim. We will ask the court to detain them and deny them bond, or if they commit some other crime after they have been initially charged with domestic assault and battery, then because they've committed a new criminal offense of any sort, then we will ask the court to detain them or revoke their original bond they may have had. So I can only speak of what we do in Suffolk. And I would say in Suffolk, and especially after hearing from the cars, we try very hard in the Suffolk Commonwealth Attorney's Office that if somebody is a victim of not only domestic violence, but any crime, especially a homicide or something of that sort, my lawyers will be in touch with them. If they get a call, those victims are going to get a call back. And in fact, if it's in any way domestic violence related, you've got Brittany and Meredith that we're constantly working with them. But we do that in all of our cases. If somebody is a victim in any criminal case and they want to know something about it and they call our office, they actually have the direct number, because it's on their subpoena, of the attorney that is actually handling their case. So they not only get to the district attorney, who may not be the individual that's actually individually prosecuting the case, but they will actually know the extension number for the lawyer that is handling their specific case. And I've made it clear to my lawyers that if you get such a call, you need to be returning phone calls, and that's the policy of the Suffolk Commonwealth Attorney's Office, because there has to be good communication between crime victims and our office in order for there to be a successful criminal prosecution. There's got to be good communication. It is critical. And that is something that we try very hard to do.
And then follow up, I think you have information about the firearms with protective order.
One thing I wanted to add with the firearm, with protective orders, if the protective order ends up becoming a permanent protective order, they have to relinquish their firearms. They're no longer allowed to carry firearms. So I just wanted to bring that up as that got brought up.
I will add one more thing, and I understand especially the frustration of the cars. One of the things that frustrates me probably more than anything else about the criminal justice system generally is the number of continuances that are granted in criminal cases that extend these cases out. We do everything in our power to try to bring these cases to a resolution as quickly as we can. But the creativity and ingenuity of defense attorneys in giving reasons for why they need a continuance is one that, I don't know how you could say, exceeds most people's imagination, for lack of a better way to put it. And the only thing I can say is a lot of times cases do go longer than we would prefer, but unfortunately the system, it's a part of the system, and it's something that you just have to deal with, and you have to try to do the best you can, because ultimately it's the judges that make the decision on whether a case is continued. You know, we can object to it as prosecutors, but ultimately the judges make the decisions in these cases.
I think there is time for one more question if there is one, and if not, then we have it. Yes.
My question is for the cars. I believe you're probably here tonight because you would like to keep this from happening to other people. So in hindsight, are there any signs or symptoms that maybe were there that you didn't see, or anything that other people could look for with their friends or family members?
For us, there were no signs. The thing I mentioned about secrets, our daughter, when she came to visit, because she come here every summer to visit with us, and she goes to camp and all that, she did say, well, my mom said I can't tell you her business, or what goes on in her house stays in her house. We never knew what it meant, and my husband always asked, was your stepdad nice to you? Is he friendly? How does he treat you? And she always said, he treats me nice, Dad. He's really nice. You know, he buys me things. He plays with us. So there were no signs. I think they all went to her basketball games together, and he sat and talked with this man, and he told him, I would never do anything to hurt your daughter. I have 2 daughters and 2 daughters up here. And he not only murdered Brianna, our daughter, he murdered his own daughters. So we have no idea. There were no signs. The mother, I think at one point did say she was going through things, but she, of course, is not going to tell new wife, she's not going to say what she's going through. If she had someone else she confided in, we have no idea. But as far as we knew, nothing, was out of the ordinary. Our daughter was never afraid to go back home after she stayed a month or so. She said, okay, I'm ready to go back and see my mom and my sisters. But it was nothing that was out of the ordinary. It was just, we have no idea. We have no inkling of what happened.
I think before we can bring this to a conclusion, while the Carr family had no idea of what was happening, one of the things we want you all to take away from tonight is that in many circumstances there are warning signals, and there weren't in this particular case. But if you know somebody, or either a professional or church or other capacity, if you have a concern, ask. There's nothing wrong with asking, and it's coming from a place of concern and love for that family. So if there is, as Mr. Carr mentioned in the very beginning, if there is only one family that feels like they've got a better idea now or this evening of how they could help or whether or not they should, then we certainly ask that the community at large take that into account, and as we try to combat this horrific crime. We wanted to thank you, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of Mr. Ferguson and Main Street Church. We'd like to thank the Carrs for being here, and particularly Jacob Blunt and Ms. Ponsek for coming from North Carolina. We know that has been a long day for you. We're here tonight to honor the survivors and the victims of domestic violence, particularly the members of the Carrs family. But thank you for taking your time and for being here. As we mentioned, there's going to be a moment in the annex if anybody would like to join us or have questions that perhaps you would not be comfortable asking in a larger group setting. There's also an opportunity for you to leave a message of encouragement for the Carr family that we will make sure that they have, in hopes that that is something to encourage them as they continue with the months ahead. Thank you all for coming.